Hello there, and a very warm welcome to Chazingdra Chats, the show where we take a stroll through the life stories of people in the Pokemon community, discovering the six Pokemon on their dream team along the way. I'm Charlie Merriman, merry by name, merry by nature, otherwise known as Chazingdra, a host and commentator for the Pokemon Video Game Championship Series, and a content creator. And this week, as always, I very much hope my guest and I can brighten your day because I have the honour of being joined by Matt Brandl, AbsolBlogsPokemon. Matt, how are you doing?
Fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for asking. I'm doing very well. I'm very excited to have you on the show. As I said to you just before we started recording, I've been a long time admirer and watcher of your videos, and you really showcase the breadth of what Pokemon has to offer. And that's obviously one of the aims of the show as well. So thrilled to have you on board.
Appreciate that. There's just so much to it. It's the greatest because of that. There's just so much out there in Pokemon.
Yeah, absolutely. Just your standard playthrough of the game is the tip of the iceberg. So can't wait to dive in. And for anyone who's not so familiar with you, Matt, can you give a brief introduction to yourself?
So I've been making Pokemon videos on YouTube for 14 years, and over that period of time, I've gotten really into looking for shiny Pokemon, the super rare alternate colored Pokemon, and documenting my journey going through all of that, alongside other fun little self-imposed challenges.
Yeah, that's a very good summary. And those self-imposed challenges, there are many of them. I'm sure you've opened many people's eyes to see just how many challenges there are to set yourself. And I'm sure that's something we'll talk more about. And of course, you join me here, not at the time of recording, but by the time this goes out, it will be Safari Week, which is an event. Well, why don't you tell us about Safari Week, Matt? You are certainly the best placed person to do that.
Gotcha. So Safari Week is a shiny hunting community event that started about 12 years ago, just within a little friend group on Skype of people who loved to just shiny hunt in the Safari Zone, which is a really dangerous place to shiny hunt because you have no idea if you're going to actually catch the Pokemon or if it's going to flee. And back in the day, people were afraid of shiny hunting there. So Safari Week was started so the whole community would get together and do it at the same time. So we'd be watching these shinies flee all together instead of just suffering through it alone. And it's really just expanded so much over the years. I started hosting it in 2015 or so, and every year it's become one of my favorite weeks of the year just because of how many people are out in the zone running around.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are so many things I enjoy about Safari Week, and for me, possibly the thing I like the most about it, or about what it represents, is that there is that chance Pokemon will flee, but just finding it in itself is so cool. And I think that reminds us that, again, it sort of is the journey, not the destination. As cheesy as that might sound, right? There are very few people in the world who will ever have had the experience of seeing a shiny X, Y, or Z in the Safari Zone. So just that in itself is special enough. And then if you're able to catch it, that's just the cherry on top. So, yeah, it's a very cool event. And this time, in a few weeks' time, you and I both will be trying to find those differently coloured pixels. And as you say,
Exactly.
no longer suffering in silence. So it's fantastic that we're able to share that. It was Kyle, who I had on the show a few weeks ago, Quick Panic, who put me in touch with you. I really wanted to get you on for Safari Week. So thank you so much for being willing, for accepting my random message and running with it.
No problem. It's an honor to be here.
Well, no, it's an honor to have you. All right, then. So let's get to know you better and get to know your hand-picked dream team of six Pokemon. Thank you, as always, for your openness with what you're sharing with everyone today. What we're going to start with is September 25th, 1998.
Important day. So my first member of my team is Butterfree. And it goes back to that day. My mom was just going through the newspaper and she was reading this article about this new phenomenon that was sweeping the nation, Pokemon. And my sister and I sat down in front of the TV and watched whatever episode was airing that day. And it was Ash versus Lieutenant Surge, which doesn't focus on Butterfree at all. I don't even think it appeared in the episode. But I was so fascinated by seeing all the Pokemon and everything after that I just knew my life was changed forever from watching that episode. It was one of my earliest memories, too. I was like no older than 3 at the time or something. But over time, Butterfree became one of my favorites from that first generation. And seeing Ash say goodbye to it was so sad to me. And over time, it remained a really significant Pokemon throughout my life in a lot of different ways. Like, it was the very first random shiny Pokemon I ever encountered in the bug catching contest in Pokemon Gold. And back then, I just thought it was the pink Butterfree from the anime. I just thought it was a special one. It wasn't like the super, super rare encounter. So I didn't catch it. And years later, it became the focus of one of my first challenges I took on YouTube. So Butterfree's always been really prevalent in my life. But going back to the first generation, whenever I first found Pokemon, that's the one that I really think is the most important member of my team from that first gen.
Wow. So, rewinding a couple of steps here, you're saying that
Of course.
playing the bug catching contest, you found a random shiny Butterfree.
I did, and it's a 5% encounter, so really lucky first ever shiny.
Oh my goodness. What I mean, you'd have seen... So, by that point, was that your first playthrough? So you hadn't at that point encountered the red Gyarados?
I hadn't encountered the red Gyarados yet, so I just thought you could find the pink Butterfree from the anime in the bug catching contest.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, oh, you can find the pink Butterfree here. That's cool. I'll catch it another time. And I was actually on a car trip to my grandma's house at the time. It was like a 2-hour drive. I spent the rest of that 2-hour drive trying to find the pink Butterfree again, and for some reason I couldn't find it.
No, crazy.
And it would be years before I would learn how rare it actually was.
Yeah. It's if anyone watching this is unfamiliar with shiny Pokemon, back in those earlier generations, there's a 1 in 8,192 chance to find a random shiny Pokemon. You gave a brief introduction at the start there, Matt, but alternate colours, essentially. Something about them will be different, and they sparkle when you encounter them. Otherwise, they're no better in terms of their stats or anything like that, but obviously shinies are highly prized for their rarity. And I can fully see how at that... How old would you have been playing Pokemon Gold then for the first time?
I was 6.
6, okay.
So really, really little.
Really, and I can see how that entirely random encounter set you on the path that you're on now. I think what Pokemon does so very well is the nostalgia factor. And trying to, reliving that memory when you were younger. And I guess at the time, it appeared and you didn't really think much of it. And it's only in hindsight that you thought, wow, that was a very special event that I can only now appreciate, sort of thing. Wow, fascinating. And you have since claimed that shiny Butterfree.
I reclaimed it as a Metapod in a Crystal a few years later. Okay. But part of me still wants to go back and find it as that Butterfree again, just to go full circle again. But that's a crazy, crazy task, going for a 5% encounter plus that 1 in 8192 chance.
Yeah. That's so interesting as well, because when I had Carl Quick Panic on, he talked about his first ever random shiny, which was a 5% Marowak in Rock Tunnel in Kanto.
Oh, wow.
And checked the balls that he had in his bag, and he had 2 Ultra Balls. And I won't spoil now what happened there. Go back and check the episode if you would like to discover what happened with that shiny Marowak. But amazing that both of your first random shinies were 5%, and both in Generation 2 as well. So that's Butterfree. Welcome Butterfree to the team. Shiny Butterfree, no less. But you also mentioned there your first encounter with the Pokemon anime. And you said you were immediately enticed by everything that was going on. What do you think specifically it was about the anime that really appealed to you?
It was really just the friendship aspect of it that just really struck home for me. Like seeing Ash and Pikachu's relationship as not just pet and owner, but best buddies alongside all the other people and everything. I just felt it was really special. It was so cool seeing that kind of dynamic and seeing Pikachu overcome the evolved Raichu in its own way. And then at the very end of the episode, after all of that, they rolled the Pokérap, which showed all these different creatures that I had never seen before. And I was like, I need to learn about all of these right now. And just knowing how many were out there, it kept me so fascinated the entire time.
Yeah.
Wanting to learn more about them, see that same depth of story as I saw with Ash and Pikachu.
Yeah, and there certainly is that depth. Did you have pets when you were younger?
Not until I was a little bit older, but I did have a dog named Daisy, Jack Russell Terrier.
Ah,
really great.
lovely, yeah. Yeah, I wondered if that's where your connection to Pokemon had come from in the first place. But wow, okay. Well, what a way to kickstart your love of the franchise. And we're going from there to the discovery that this show that you loved has cards and a video game.
Exactly. So that leads into the second team member, which I'll explain in a little bit here. So Pokemon was just my favorite show for the longest time, and I love watching it every single day. My family, we only really had a Super Nintendo, so a much older system at the time. Like we were already in the Nintendo 64 era at the time. But eventually in first grade, I was out on the playground, and some kid on the playground had a Game Boy Advance with a copy of Pokemon Gold. And in that moment, I learned that my favorite show was also like not only a video game, but a video game where you could catch a whole team of like any Pokemon you wanted and use them the entire time. And that changed everything for me. That entire school year, I just kept imagining what my team would be and everything. And there were two Pokemon that I decided on for it. I wanted to have a Meganium and I wanted to have a Tyranitar. And whenever I did eventually get gold, I'd learned that I wouldn't be able to have Tyranitar until the very, very end of the game. It's literally the last thing you can catch after getting all 16 badges. But I was able to start with that Chikorita and have that Meganium the whole way through. And it was really in that moment that I discovered that Pokemon was a video game that I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be something that I'm going to love for like the rest of my life. And Meganium and that whole line also holds a little bit of extra sentimentality for me too, because years later in the spin-off game Pokemon Coliseum for the GameCube, where you capture shadow Pokemon that are evil and you like purify their hearts, I shiny hunted for the Shadow Bayleaf in that game. And that was one of my first experiences ever live streaming. And that hunt really stuck with me too. So having a Meganium or a Bayleaf on the team really solidifies itself as like the second team member. It's also just this gentle giant dinosaur, and I'm a big fan of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you going with Bayleaf or Meganium for this slot?
That's something that it took me a long time to decide on, but I think in this moment I'm deciding Meganium. Let it
Okay.
fully evolve.
Yeah, fair enough. Meganium. But it's great to have that love for the middle stage evolutions, which, you know, I think it's time that we started to see those middle stage evolutions as ends in themselves almost, rather than just a stop that we're passing through to get to the final evolution. It's great that you have that love for Bayleaf and Shadow Bayleaf, no less, making it an even more unique memory for you. Because Shadow Pokemon really are confined to just a couple of games, really.
Right, it's a rare experience. It was so
Yeah.
cool to see them return to Go years later.
Mm,
Have them use that concept again.
yeah, absolutely. What do you think it was that made you zero in on Meganium and Tyranitar?
It's a really good question. I think it really might have been the discovery of the card game and just collecting cards and everything. I pulled a holographic Tyranitar from a pack, and that was just one of my favorite cards. I would always just look at it and be like, this Pokemon is so cool.
Mm.
And out of all the Johto starters, just most of my friends were always talking about like how they love Cyndaquil and Totodile. Notice no one was really talking much about Chikorita, and the anime didn't really focus too much on Meganium or anything either. So I wanted to have my own story with a Meganium in it or something, just to see what that Pokemon was like, because I thought it was underrated, and it really became one of my favorites in that way too.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to show love for a Pokemon that can be seen as underrated. And if you're unfamiliar, Chikorita is sort of the equivalent of Bulbasaur in Generation 2, the grass first partner Pokemon, and Tyranitar, sort of the equivalent of Dragonite. It's the Pokemon that appears very late in the decks, that is in the Pokedex, that's very powerful. So you finally were able to claim your Tyranitar at the very end. Did you then train it all the way up so it was on your team for taking on Red at the top of Mount Silver, or did you just sort of do that in your spare time?
I took on Red beforehand, and then I trained up the Larvitar into Tyranitar, which I remember took me days, because you catch Larvitar at about level 20, doesn't evolve the Tyranitar until level 55, so had a lot of level grinding to do in the grass off of all the wild Pokemon there.
Yeah. I kind of love, though, that you find Larvitar at level 20 rather than as high as the levels as you can find some of those Pokemon there, just because it gives you more of a journey with it. It's more of a challenge, of course, but that
Exactly.
strengthens the bond. Yeah, for sure.
Gives you more of a journey.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember encountering Larvitar for the first time when I was playing through Silver and thinking, wow, I've never seen that before. I wonder what that becomes. And yeah, like you, then the task began of evolving it into Pupitar. And as soon as it evolved into Pupitar, I thought, this is going to be good. Whatever this is going to become. And lo and behold, along comes Tyranitar. Yeah. Incredible. Now, in that time, in that playthrough, you had your the shiny Buttery that you found. Were there any other random shinies at that point?
There were actually a couple others.
Wow.
I ran into a Flaffy at one point. I was really, really lucky as a kid, I guess.
Yeah.
I ran into a Flaffy, and it looked almost the same color, because a lot of shiny Pokemon aren't always the most striking differences. So I didn't catch it. And then I found a shiny Tangela at Mount Silver, probably while I was actually training that Larvitar. And back in that day, sometimes Pokemon had a chance of fleeing from you if they were a certain species, and Tangela was one of those. So before I could even chuck my second Ultra Ball at it, it got away.
Oh, no. Oh, so all three of the random shiny Pokemon that you've mentioned so far, you weren't actually able to claim. That's
I wasn't able to get any of them.
Wow. And again, this adds lore to the journey you've been on and where you've arrived at now. I can see how that would fuel your passion to find more shiny Pokemon. Okay, incredible. Meganium and a special place for Tyranitar there as well. Right, so going from there seems like a good place to start talking about this crazy luck that you had when you were younger.
Exactly. So I had those random encounters with shiny Pokemon, and eventually the first one I actually caught was a shiny Lickitung and Crystal. But my next team member, the third team member, has got to be Absol. Because as time kept going on, I thought that shiny Pokemon, these alternate colored ones, were only really in the Generation 2 games, Gold, Silver, and Crystal versions. And as we got into the Generation 3 games, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, I really wondered if they were possible still. And eventually I stumbled upon this website that had an online Pokedex with all of the Pokemon. And I was just looking up this one Pokemon I had a lot of interest in, Absol. And suddenly on the page, I saw this red Absol. And I was like, whoa, these still exist. These are still out there. And seeing that red Absol, I just knew that I needed to get one of those one day. And it kind of became my favorite Pokemon, my white whale to chase after in that moment there. And from there, I really learned how rare they actually were. That was the moment that things started to really click in my brain, that like that pink Butterfree that I had found was this extremely rare 1 in 8,192 encounter. And my entire perspective on Pokemon just totally changed right there. That deep within these games, there are these hidden, super, super rare Pokemon that you might encounter along your journey. And you have to go so out of your way if you want to try and find one yourself. And that changed my perspective on everything. I never thought I would have the patience to actually encounter one for myself. But I was so fascinated in them and like trying to learn what the different colors were for every shiny Pokemon out there. And that's really something that stuck with me for life, and trying to continue to get that patience to actually start hunting them down. And it's all because of that Absol, really, that really drove me to keep doing that. Even though I had failed the shinies before and everything, going back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, sometimes it's just the journey to see something that matters to me. So I don't necessarily feel this extreme motivation to reclaim that Tangela or anything, but I wanted to see that Absol, and that's really what drove me in the direction to start shiny hunting.
I thought you were going to say there that your first random encounter shiny in Generation 3 was Absol, and I thought, wow, you really are the luckiest person. But no, I see. So you were just...
I'd be hitting the lottery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, okay. So you learned what the shiny Absol looked like before you actually went out to find it. So what got you interested in Absol in the first place?
That's a really good question. Growing up, when I was really little, I always had a lot of anxiety about the weather and disasters. Like I think I watched a Weather Channel show about a tornado, maybe a little bit too young, seeing the destructive force it could have. So I was always watching the weather, a little bit paranoid about it and stuff. And then I saw this super cool Pokemon come across my screen, Absol, and I learned that it warned people about disasters. And I was like, wow, this is a really cool Pokemon. I would have this on my team if I were a trainer, so I could always know. And they always advertised it as this super cool Pokemon too. It was on the cover of Pokemon Box for the GameCube. It was in the Jirachi Wishmaker movie. It was definitely a Pokemon that they advertised a lot back in the day then, and I always thought it was extra special because of that too.
That's such a fascinating story behind it, rather than just, you like the design. And it is a really cool design, of course. But, wow, I wonder... Yeah, I wonder what fascinated young you by these disasters that would happen around the world. I guess it is a notion that would capture the imagination. But yeah, I mean, do you have any inkling as to why that would be?
I think it was really because I had watched certain shows on TV about the destructive forces of nature and everything, and I was always just wondering how people prepared for that, and it got me a little bit scared about all of it. But whenever I saw Absol, I was like, maybe there's a way that people can be all okay about it. They get the right warning ahead of time and everything. And when I was really, really little, I think I wanted to become a meteorologist for that reason. Things didn't really actually pan out that way, but I always thought Absol would be useful to have around for that, and kind of just tied into all of that there. And I say that even though that there's a weather Pokemon itself, Cast Form, that changes forms based off the weather. But the way that Absol's Pokedex entry describes it as warning people about disasters ahead of time, that's what really like struck me as like this Pokemon's something special.
Yeah, absolutely. What an interesting connection that you've got there. So, at what point, how long after that did you decide, okay, it's time to find a shiny Absol and go on that hunt?
I was about 10 years old at the time, and I just started hatching eggs. And back then, in an Emerald version, there was no way of boosting your shiny chances through hatching. It was always 1 in 8,192 per every egg, and hatching those eggs would take minutes at a time. I got through maybe 3 or 4 boxes, so about 120 eggs that summer trying to go for it before I kind of just gave up and said, I'll come back to this another day. And I wouldn't really fulfill that until maybe 2018 when I went back to Ruby and finally actually encountered that shiny Absol in the wild.
Wow.
So it was kind of a journey almost in a way of building up that patience and understanding like what it would really take to find a shiny like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The moment you encountered that, I mean, talk to us about your feelings.
I was in utter complete disbelief at the moment. It was crazy. I had to double take. I was actually physically shaking. That happens sometimes when I find a shiny I've been looking for so long. I just kind of start shaking with excitement. And I had been preparing for the capture of it, but I did not want to mess it up at all. So I went for the Master Ball instead. And honestly, no better use of a Master Ball, something that catches any Pokemon without fail, than using it on a shiny that means that much to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, fascinating to hear. So, your team so far, Shiny Butterfree, Meganium, and Absol. And now we're moving from there. In your own words, you said to me in the notes you sent over before we recorded today, you're not much of a battler, but you didn't let that hold you back.
Exactly. So, in the world of competitive battling, it's something that I've always loved watching and have been interested in. But I recognized kind of early on that I'm not super cut out for it, in the sense that I love to stick to my favorites maybe a little bit too much over what would be a good, viable, competitive pick for a Pokemon to use on a team. I know that teams are ever changing in the competitive world. And while there are ways to create and shape teams around your favorites, a lot of the time it's so niche that I decided, you know what, I'm better off watching this on the sidelines and sometimes just making teams for fun. And from there, I wasn't really sure what my place was in the Pokemon content creation world, because people were either playing through the games or doing battles like that back on YouTube in 2009, 2010. And while I was still enjoying making little teams every now and then, like eventually I would mess around a lot with Eviolite Grottle, talking about middle evolution starters like we were talking about earlier. That was always a really funny one to use because it's grass type and not grass ground, like its evolved form Torterra. And people never really accounted for that. They kept using the wrong move types on it. But anyway, going back to that, I wasn't all that interested in making videos about battling and wondered where my niche really was. And then I stumbled across this really unique Pokemon YouTube channel called Pokemon Blogger, who focused on a lot of the other stranger parts of the series. Like, he and his friends would get together and go to the different stores that were having mythical Pokemon distributions. Like, you could go up to a store and download a Manaphy or something to your game, or going out of his way to capture a certain Pokemon in his game, often combining real life footage and mixing in Pokemon sprites and just imagining what the whimsical world of Pokemon was like. And suddenly in that moment, I realized that I could make Pokemon videos too, just kind of doing my own thing. And that's what really inspired me to start creating back in 2010, trying to document getting an entire national dex, which was 493 Pokemon at the time back in Heart Gold. And that's really what inspired me to start going 14 years ago. And ever since, it's just expanded from there with all the different ideas I've had with making videos. And going into the fourth team member that relates to that, I'm picking Rotom for that because just because of its utility, I think Rotom would be a super useful Pokemon to have around in the real world. You'd have an infinite source of electricity. I'd be able to use it as a camera drone for taking different pictures and everything. And all of the games recently, they've used Rotom and all these different pieces of technology that have been so useful on the player's journey. And I feel like I got to have a Rotom too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about everything you've said there in reverse. So starting with Rotom. Yeah. An electric ghost type that sort of, I guess, seems to be based around the concept of when technology doesn't do what you want it to, sort of thing. Rotom comes in a few forms. It can inhabit, so to speak, an oven, for example, become an electric fire type, or a fan become an electric flying type, things like that. Yeah, you're so right. It would be very useful to have indeed. Is there a specific memory you associate with Rotom, or is it more thinking broadly?
It's more thinking broadly. I was trying to think of what Pokemon would be most useful for helping me in my day-to-day making videos and everything, and Rotom is really the one that I landed on for that. I feel like it would be the most useful to have around for that.
Yeah, for sure. A really interesting path and decisions behind all of the Pokemon in your team, and a really good balance of types so far as well. So we've got Bug Flying with Butterfree, got Grass with Meganium, Dark with Absol, and now Electric Ghost. We don't have any double ups yet, but we'll see how that shakes out. Okay, and then before that, yeah, you talked about Grottle, and that was your competitive brain at work there. And I mean that's really creative. That's really creative team building there. Catching players off guard because they assume that it's going to have the same typing as its full evolution. So yeah, I mean, did you see some success with using Grottle in your competitive battling?
Sometimes online when I'd play against my friends, I would see I would really catch them off guard. They would get caught in the leech seed, and it would be a really really long battle with them trying to take this thing down, not really knowing what moves to use. And that was always really fun.
Yeah, that's very impressive indeed. And then yeah, that day you discovered just all of the things that you could make videos about that didn't have to be battling. At the time that you discovered this YouTuber, had they been going for a long time at that point? Were there lots of videos for you to catch up on?
There were a lot.
Yeah.
He had been going since 2007, since really the start of the fourth generation of Pokemon, Diamond and Pearl, and he had already done a full video series catching all 493 Pokemon in Platinum. So I was directly inspired to try and do that same thing in Heart Gold. And after doing that, that's when I really kind of split off and started doing my own things after that. But I just loved watching him because he was always just taking on these really, really unique perspectives on things. Like, he went on an adventure for a legendary Pokemon where he would go out in the woods, and it felt like what it would be like if we were looking for a legendary Pokemon in real life. And that just tickled my imagination in just the right way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I have no doubt that people will be saying exactly the same of you, Matt, saying that you've opened their eyes to all of the breadth that the series has to offer, and just fascinated by all the adventures that you can take on. Because I'm one of them. I'm one of those fans who really enjoy
Appreciate
seeing
that.
what you can discover next. Okay, so then you took on that challenge of completing the Pokédex in Heart Gold version, and that is a remake of Pokemon Gold version, which of course was your introduction to the entire series. So I mean, it must have, as soon as Heart Gold and Soul Silver were announced, you must have been buzzing.
Oh, I was over the moon about it. I was always reading theories online about why people thought that they were going to be the next games remade, and I was always so invested in it because in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum in the Pokemon Center, the little Pokeball in the center of the room was gold and silver. And as a kid, I was always looking into that, being like, okay, this means we're going back to those games next. It's gotta. And I was so happy to see it come true.
Wow, I'd never thought about that. And so, did you do it? You completed the Pokédex in Heart Gold.
I did, and it took almost a full year. It was how I spent my time leading directly up into the release of the next generation, Black and White. So for only 1 or 2 days, I had captured all the Pokemon in existence, and then I had to catch all of the new ones the next day when the next games came out.
Wow, it's good that you did it just in time, but
Right.
yeah, the grind never stops, I guess.
Exactly.
Um, wow, and how did you? I imagine the nostalgia experience playing through Heart Gold, having started with Pokemon Gold version, was immense. But talk to us a little bit about your feelings playing through the game.
It was fantastic. I could not believe that it was a real Pokemon game most of the time. They added so much that just continued to make the region feel more special. And even just the little details, like having your Pokemon follow behind you at all
Mm.
times, that was so unique at the time. It felt like they had put so much love and effort into every corner of it. And what really, really struck me was after you become the champion, you get this item called the GB Sounds that plays the original music from the old Game Boy games again. And they not only did that, but they also made remixes of some of the new music they added, like the Safari Zone and everything in that Game Boy style. So everything in that game just went above and beyond. And it felt like a full circle moment to start making videos with a remake of the game that started my love for the games in the first place.
Yeah, well, exquisitely put there, Matt. And we're going from there into your life as a programmer and one fateful night for your YouTube channel.
Exactly. So things kind of continued to progress. I went through all of high school and all of college just making these videos for fun on the side because it was always what I enjoyed doing as my in my free time to de-stress or just to hang out with friends online while working on these challenges and everything. And I eventually got a job as a programmer, and I was just working in the office every day, just imagining how I could take things further with making more videos and everything. And then the first day of 2019, I literally had sudden overnight success with the YouTube channel, and it blew my mind, really. A video I had uploaded in 2015 was randomly exploding with views overnight, and I had no explanation as to why. I had no idea why it was happening, but it was a video of me training an Inkata to level 100 in Pokemon Ruby version. And suddenly from there, I was just getting this constant new influx of comments and subscriptions and people telling me to make more videos that it opened up a whole new world to me and making more videos and gave me so much extra motivation. It was almost an overload whenever I would check my comments every day because there would be so many. And people were slowly uncovering the rest of the catalog of videos I had made over the years. Because I had been making videos to a pretty small audience most of the time, just kind of doing it because I found it fun above all else. And suddenly there were all these people watching, and I felt an added pressure, but also felt so validated in everything I'd worked so much time on over the past few years. And it really like struck home that this was a huge important part of my life.
Mm.
And that really changed my perspective on everything there. I had to get used to getting all sorts of comments, mostly extremely lovely comments that made me feel incredible, but also dealing with negative comments and not letting them get to me and everything. And eventually, the first games that came out after that were the 8th generation games, Sword and Shield. And within those games, I discovered a Pokemon that became one of my new favorites, Phalanx, which are these little guys walking around in formation. And they just completely took my expectations and blew them out of the water for what a Pokemon could be. And I think they're definitely the next member of my team because it really just showed that the magic of Pokemon was still there to me. And I also liked how they're like a leader in a group of followers. And suddenly I felt like I had my own followers too in that moment that year. So it was a good formative Pokemon for me at the time.
You are the top brass Phalanx, and it's the perfect word to use there, formative, because they're known as the formation Pokemon.
Exactly.
The Pokedex. Perfect. Phalanx is got to be one of my favorites as well. It's great. Love to hear you showing love to Phalanx. One of the pins I have for casting is the Phalanx. It sits proudly on the lapel. Yeah.
I got that same one too.
Very good. Yes, Phalanx. So, okay, let's rewind. You said you sort of discovered this YouTube channel that got you that opened your eyes to just what Pokemon content could be back in 2010. Is that when you started your own channel as well?
It is. I've been uploading since March of 2010.
March of 2010. Okay. And so how old did you have been then, remind us?
I was 14.
14 then. Okay. Wow. That's amazing. And I mean the decision behind, okay, I want to put my own videos out there. There are all sorts of places where that could have come from. Talk to us in your own words about where that came from for you.
For me, it came from just seeing this whole new genre of Pokemon videos that I didn't even know could really exist until I saw that channel and wanting to see more of them. So I started making the videos that I would have wanted to watch. And that's really where it all came from. And that's still kind of how it is for me. Like,
sure.
I love just kind of trying to make videos for myself.
That's the best way to go about it, right? I think there are so many content creators these days, and you've got to do something unique in order to stand out from the crowd, in order to offer something that people haven't seen before. So you're doing it sort of for you, and at that point, you know, any views you get are a bonus. It's just something you enjoy doing. And did you enjoy everything that came with that process? Like, did you enjoy editing as well?
I did. I really got a love for video editing out of it too. I started to really enjoy trying to take a huge amount of footage and trying to synthesize it into like a narrative, a story. And I really, really love that whole process to this day. And it became one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, that's well, you are a fantastic storyteller, so I'm glad that editing sort of enabled you to discover that aspect of yourself. And then, okay, so you continued playing Pokemon, hang out with friends, and became a programmer. Well, you said initially that you know, at a very young age were interested in meteorology and the weather. Sort of at what point did the dust settle and you thought programming is something I would enjoy doing and could get a lot out of?
Really, it was video games and stuff like Pokemon in the first place. I went into computer science just keeping in mind that I just loved how video games were the perfect synthesis of so many different types of media all at once, like art, audiovisual, music, storytelling, and everything. And I wanted to learn a little bit of the magic, the glue that holds it together. And I found out that I kind of had a knack for doing the whole programming side of things. I didn't end up working in the video game field, which might have ended up working out for the better because of how much crunch time goes into that. But the programming side of things is just where I ended up landing instead of the whole meteorology thing.
Yeah. Presumably, people at your work are aware of your YouTube presence as well.
I'd say some of them are.
Oh, really?
It's not something I really actually bring up all that often, to see if people figure it out for themselves or anything. I kind of just stay a little bit quiet about it and just kind of just go about my day with it and see what happens.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fair enough. It's interesting to think about how many people have had that mind blown moment where they suddenly stumble across you and then find your YouTube channel. And wow, okay. So then, yeah, this the Ninkata video that you made, which I've also watched, and it's part of a series, your Level 100 Gauntlet series. Can you
Right.
remind anyone who's not so familiar with that what that's all about?
So the level 100 Gauntlet series is something I started with around then with that video, where I just try and find new ways to train up Pokemon and weird, unconventional ways that you wouldn't really think would be efficient or just are very different from just standard battling against wild Pokemon or trainers. Because there's so many ways to gain experience points and levels in the game. Some of them are really out of the way, and I always just loved challenging myself to find new ways to train up Pokemon. And it's taken me on all kinds of unexpected adventures. And it's not as much about reaching that level 100 at the end as it is about the journey. And, that's one of the big themes of everything here. And those journeys have taken me on these really, really wild adventures that I never expected, with all sorts of interesting discoveries about the game and how the game works along the way, alongside meeting a lot of friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Ninkata one was the first one that you did.
But it was the first one that I did where I called it that.
Okay.
Slightly before that, I had done one with a Gumi in X and Y because they had just made it so capturing Pokemon let you gain experience. So I did something with only captures then. But then the Ninkata one was the first one that I really called the Gauntlet and really took off from there. It was definitely one of the higher performing videos on the channel for a while comparatively to everything else. But in 2019, that January 1st, 2019, New Year's Day, it just suddenly shot up in views overnight, and it just kept rising, and I kept checking on it, and I was like, what is happening with this 4-year-old video right now? And that was one of the most surreal days of my life.
Yeah, it's fascinating how it all works, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah, New Year's Day as well. What a happy New Year for you then.
Exactly.
It's incredible. Yeah, I mean, it must have been so strange, as you say, immediately feeling that pressure for something that up to that point had just been a side quest, so to speak, a hobby. How can you talk to us about how that sort of changed your perspective on the whole act of content creation?
It changed a lot for me, honestly, because there were sometimes times in those years leading up to it where I always felt that I was maybe doing something wrong along the way. And it wasn't necessarily true in the way that I viewed my own videos. I always thought that they were fun enough to be a video that I'd want to watch, and that's usually my standards for before I click the upload button. But I always wondered what exactly I was doing wrong. And sometimes all it takes is just that little stroke of luck to realize that maybe you're not doing anything wrong, and you're learning as you go. And it's just a little bit, just a difference in exposure to it. And that it really gave me that extra motivation and strength to keep going out there with these ideas and keep pushing forward with it. After it was just a really, really validating experience, I guess, after all these years of just working on things. A lot of those self-doubts got removed, but then I also felt this added pressure that I had never felt before to be like, okay, I have to make this as good as this video now.
Sure. Yeah. Have you ever considered leaning fully into the content creation full time?
It's definitely a decision that I'm constantly straddling with, for sure. Especially with how frequently I've streamed and everything in comparison. And it's something that I kind of put on the back burner when lockdown happened in 2020, because I was able to start working fully remotely instead of going into the office every day then. So I was able to strike a really good work and life balance with that. But now things have started to change again. I'm starting to go into the office some days out of the week, and I'm starting to kind of struggle with that decision again. But part of me always kind of worries about, if I did start doing this full time, would I still have as much fun with it? And the short answer is probably, but sometimes just thinking about making that leap is really scary.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I think that's a very wise and well considered answer. And then, yeah, so that took you into the next main series games released, Sword and Shield. When you knew they were on the horizon, did you sort of feel something that you hadn't felt before, which was, how do I utilize these to the best of their ability for content sort of thing, or was it just, I'm just going to do what I've always done, I'm going to make videos that I would enjoy watching and enjoy the games sort of thing?
It was a really good mixture of both. At the start of every generation, starting with X and Y back in 2013, I enjoyed making these movie videos about my first experience playing through the game. And I had kind of lost a lot of motivation on making those in the latter half of Generation 7. I didn't make one on Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. I didn't make one on Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. But this return to Sword and Shield, I realized that I needed to make one of these videos no matter what, and really push myself to make that. And it wasn't necessarily constantly trying to think of, okay, I have to utilize these games to the maximum potential. It's, I need to really focus in and make these video ideas happen that I have, instead of just letting them fall to the wayside or being like, oh, this isn't happening.
Yeah, okay. That brings us back up to Phalanx there with Generation 8. It must be so strange for you, as someone who's been making YouTube videos that feature you yourself for 14 years. You've got quite a lot of your life documented for a good chunk of time. And I mean, I know when I've gone back and seen some of your much older videos, I thought, wow, this is such a unique perspective, being able to see this guy grow up, essentially. How does that feel for you?
It's very strange. Like, sometimes I don't even think about it, and when I realize it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got like the past 14 years of my life documented in a way through making these videos on different hard drives and everything. And it's really interesting to have that sort of whole documentation of my life and going through all of it. I know a lot of people kind of sometimes reach a point where they want to delete a lot of their older videos because they aren't as proud of them compared to a lot of the newer stuff. But I feel like I'd be losing some of that journey of myself if I were to ever do that, even if I don't feel super strongly about some of them. So it's motivated me to keep my videos up from that era, just to like be able to appreciate where I've come from, instead of just trying to only show myself at my best all the time.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say that it's sort of, in a way, a meta video. I guess that's the term I'd use, seeing the videos as a whole, as a series, and over the years, that add something to your channel that perhaps others aren't able to do because they haven't been making these videos since such a young age. So really interesting to get your perspective on that. Okay, so team so far is Butterfree, Meganium, Absol, Rotom, and Phalanx. And
That's it.
before we get on to the final member joining your dream team, I mean, we're moving on to you now and what Pokemon has enabled for you.
I'm living in a really interesting era right now, to say the least. Like, now that we've really gotten out of the lockdown era, I'm starting to go back into the office again. I'm starting to kind of feel a crossroads, but also like I'm entering a new era. I'm doing so much more traveling than I used to, especially after the whole pandemic and everything, where I was just stuck here this whole time. And I'm just really starting to see the whole world that's out there and think about the whole world of possibilities. And at the end of it all, though, Pokemon's just remained this constant, though. Like, no matter what ends up happening, where I end up going, it's just this constant that'll always be a part of me that I always want to keep trying to work on new videos for. And sometimes it's hard whenever I don't have as much time to dedicate to it, but I always just know that if I find enough time for it, I will. And kind of just goes back to a really recent Pokemon that I think has got to be my sixth team member because of just the journey that it's been on too. And it's the 3-segment to Dunsparce. Because Dunsparce was this Pokemon that I always thought about as just like this weird forgotten one. I also used it whenever I was making competitive teams because I really liked its ability Serene Grace that boosted the chance of secondary effects happening, and then using Thunder Fang to both paralyze and flinch my opponents. And I just loved Dunsparce, and I just thought that it was this poor, underrated Pokemon. And then with Scarlet and Violet, not only did they give it a new evolution, they gave it an evolution with 2 special forms, the Dunsparce. And it still captures the essence that made the original Dunsparce so weird. And I just loved it as a Pokemon, to the point where I dedicated a couple months of my life last year to shiny hunting for the rare 3-segment variant, which only has a 1% chance of happening when you evolve a Dunsparce into it. And I don't know, it's just kind of become this Pokemon that's a big part of my life now. And seeing Dunsparce's journey over the years kind of motivates me on my own journey to keep going.
Yeah, very well put. I think, yeah, it's worth talking about how the odds stack there. So yes, you've got a 1% chance of a 3-segment to Dunsparce, but then taking into account the odds of encountering shinies, now at this point, it's 1 in 4,096 rather than the original 1 in 8,192. So yeah, incredibly rare find. My favorite Generation 9 Pokemon is Mousehold, and of course that also has a rarer version. 1% of the time you have a family of 3 Mousehold, if you're not familiar with that Pokemon. Tandemaus, 2 mice, in fact. Yeah, they are.
Let's go.
They have a 1% chance of evolving into a family of 3, so 1 little mouse added there. But most of the time it's going to be a family of 4, so 2 little mice added with the Tandemaus. So yeah, that's something I'm looking forward to to getting into myself. But yeah, I think the Dunsparce is such a brilliant Pokemon because, as you say, this sort of lore had been built up around Dunsparce, where it was so rare in Generation 2. It was always there. It wasn't too powerful, really, but because it was such a unique Pokemon, it seemed like the path to go was just, well, we'll just make the evolution a bigger Dunsparce. And
exactly.
that's what it ended up being. There are a couple of added details, but it's such a cool evolution. And the name is really interesting as well. I wonder if part of it comes from, the moment we've all been waiting for, dun dun dun, sparse. Sort of thing. Yeah. Well, yeah, and that certainly represents a really good stage of where you're at now with your Pokemon journey. And I mean, you've made these videos, your channel suddenly found success, and through it, you must have made so many friends online first, who you then met in person. Can you talk to us about that?
Exactly. The shiny hunting community has always been this really tight-knit community. Even back when I first started watching shiny hunting videos, before I had the patience to really hunt myself, I loved learning about all the different terminology within the community, seeing who all was looking for these things, and just getting inspired myself watching other people find things. It was just people documenting the shinies they had found. And slowly over time, I joined these little Skype and eventually Discord groups of friends, and we would often just hop on calls and shiny hunt together. And as time's gone on, I found more and more little groups, and eventually last year, I met up with some of my friends, including Kyle, Quick Panic, on a trip to Texas for Safari Week last year. And it was so cool to be able to experience this brand new place with people I met through Pokemon like that. And even in the process of that, we went into this one store and we met another full odds shiny hunter in the wild, which I'd say is just as rare as finding another shiny. And she's my friend Kotatsu and Univa, who's become my very best friend, which is so cool too. Just that I can have a random encounter with someone else that I have this kind of Pokemon connection with.
That's so
cool.
So well put. A shiny hunter random in the wild. How did that come about? How did you learn that this person who you'd met was a shiny hunter?
She recognized me from my videos.
Okay.
Just walked up to me and was like, "Hey, I know your videos and stuff." And I was like, "No way." And we just hit it off from there.
Wow. That's yeah, and again, that must have been something for you to come to terms with as well, as your channel suddenly got much more successful, and especially, I guess, after lockdown. Just, have you had many encounters with people doing that, coming up to you and saying, "Oh, you're that guy"?
It's crazy because yes, I went on my first ever international trip last year to Japan with some friends, and I was recognized twice there by people visiting from other countries as well. And both times it was the most surreal thing ever to be in such an unfamiliar place to me, a completely different nation where I didn't even speak the language, but people were able to walk up to me and be like, "Absol, what are you doing here?" And I was like, It's a small world after all. I cannot believe that that's something that can even fathomably happen just because of making these Pokemon videos.
A small world, but I mean, your channel has that reach that enables that to happen. I'm sure you've seen now as sort of one of the founding members of the shiny hunting community in a way, and couldn't be under more welcoming leadership. So
Appreciate that.
yeah, no, for sure. So amazing. So you've got your team here. You've got Shiny Butterfree, Meganium, Absol, Rotom, Phalanx, and now the 3-segment Dunsparce. Okay, so of those 6 Pokemon, and again, the type coverage has been kept up. So adding to the Bug Flying, then
Which is
Grass.
surprising to me.
Yeah, and then Dark, and then the Electric Ghost, and then you add Phalanx, which is Fighting, and the Dunsparce, which is a normal type. So, which of these Pokemon are you going to choose to be your partner Pokemon?
I think it's got to be Absol. It's been the Pokemon that's been my favorite since I was maybe 10 years old, and I've always just imagined myself having an Absol in real life if Pokemon were real like that.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, it's a part of some of your online handles, but to the point where your X handle is just the Absol. So I mean, clearly you
Right.
you were really wanting to embody this Pokemon in order to create your content, I suppose. Okay, yeah, Absol, that makes total sense. And again, such a strong and interesting connection to that Pokemon in particular. Now, zooming out a little bit, I want to know, if you were a Pokemon, what Pokemon do you think you would be?
The answer would not be Absol for me, which is pretty interesting. Like it's my favorite, and it's what I'd have as a partner Pokemon. But I actually reached out to a couple friends to help try and reach this answer, and we reached a conclusion that I'm kind of like an Azumarill. I'm like usually just happy and pretty joyful, able to spread that around, but also I can get serious if I need to, and take down a legendary with huge power, belly drum, that kind of stuff.
I love that answer. I think that's really insightful, actually, and it's very appropriate. And Azumarill, that's a dual water and fairy type, and I can see them both for you. I can. Yeah, I think you're someone who goes with the flow. You also have flowing locks, clearly, with your hair. And I think the fairy typing really represents the positivity, I think, that you bring to the community, and the joy that you give so many people, even from way afar, through your videos. So, and of course the disposition of that Pokemon as well, like you say. Who was it who helped you come up with that answer?
My friend Kotatsu did. I reached out and I was like, okay, what Pokemon do I embody? And I was just trying to think about it. I had it narrowed down to a few other options, but Azumarill was probably like the best one.
Yeah. What other options were you toying with?
I was thinking about Slowking, because it can be really analytical, but is also always pretty chill. And Alolan Raichu, for a lot of the same reasons as Azumarill, but not much of a surfer type. So,
although your shirt begs to differ.
That's true. I guess I kind of more enjoy time on the water than surfing on the water. So
Yeah, Azumarill. Yeah. Azumarill. Well, fantastic answer there. What do you think? Do you agree that Matt would be an Azumarill of all the Pokemon there are, based on everything we've heard about Matt so far? Let us know in the comments. Matt especially would be fascinated to hear. And if you're listening to this on one of the audio apps, then hop on over to YouTube, where this episode also is, and let us know. And you can also see some of the Pokemon that Matt has been talking about, including their shiny variants. And speaking of you all, it's time for questions from all of you over online. I posted asking for community questions for Matt, and thank you as always for coming out in your droves in order to submit questions for Matt. Matt doesn't know which ones that I have chosen to ask, so let's get into it. We're going to do it slightly different this time, in that I had so many of the suggestions were really interesting, more quick fire style, sort of favorites and bests. So we're going to lean slightly more into that. And this first question comes from someone whose name has been popping up quite a lot this episode, and that is Quick Panic Carl Wilkinson, who, and I'm going to quote the full comment that Carl put here. Hey Matt, we all know that Pokemon X, a movie adventure, is one of the most critically acclaimed films of our generation, but what would you say is your favorite film that you've ever worked on?
I think my favorite answer, I mean, my favorite would have to be my Pokemon Emerald Professor Oak Challenge, which is where you have to capture every Pokemon that's possible before every badge, meaning you have to fully evolve your first partner Pokemon. You have to fully evolve everything you can catch up to that point with no trading. And the journey that I went on for that was just so much fun. And I got to really document a whole lot of meaningful things over the course of that.
Yeah, I've also seen that video, and it really is no mean feat because, of course, so many Pokemon evolve at a certain level, and as a Pokemon levels up, they need to gain more experience points in order to achieve higher levels, and that means you're going to have to, for example, fully evolve your starter Pokemon, which normally evolves around level 36, before taking on that first gym, and it just gets exponentially more difficult, of course, because the Pokemon around
Right.
remain at such a low level. And there are various ways that you can speed up that process, which again, that Matt is so good at documenting all of the ins and outs that the games has to offer. So thoroughly recommend that you check out that video. And thank you for that question, Quick Panic. Now, moving on to this question from our goatee. What is your favorite level 100 gauntlet?
That's a good question. I think my favorite might have been the first Wonder Trade one that I did in Pokemon Y, because that's really where I got to like take full advantage of seeing what the community could do over the course of it. Wonder trading with so many of the people who I talked with on my stream all the time and everything, and it felt like I wasn't just working towards this goal. Everyone as community was, and it just felt so special, and that really like motivated me to keep going with all of those. So that one has always stuck in my head as like the most special gauntlet I ever did.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Now, Algotti added to that question, why is it struggle? Which is another level 100 gauntlet that you've done, and clearly a very popular one as well. Struggle is a move that your Pokemon uses only when they've run out of all the other moves they can use. And so, yeah, really, real challenge there, as they all are. Thank you for that question. And now, from Dolph the Blue, what's your favorite music from the Pokemon games?
For me, it's either gotta be two completely different vibes with this. The lake theme from Diamond Pearl Platinum, because it's just so peaceful and serene, or the Battle Frontier Brain theme from Pokemon Emerald. There's like no feeling of like triumphant battle more than that, like battling all the way through this super difficult facility and then getting to that theme. I remember when I was really little reaching Noland in the battle factory for the first time, just hearing that and being like, wow, this battle is serious.
Yeah. That's one of sort of the big battle bosses in Pokemon Emerald from Generation 3. And you're so right, two entirely contrasting moods to those pieces of music. Music in the Pokemon games is always such a standout feature. And I mean, music with anything, be it movies or anything else, always has this sort of transportative ability to it, taking us right back there, reawakening those memories. And yeah, someone with such a deep knowledge of the games, those are two really, really good answers. Yeah, incredible. Thank you so much for that answer, that question, Dolph the Blue. In fact, when did you start streaming specifically?
I've had my Twitch channel for almost 10 years now at this point, but I didn't really start streaming regularly until lockdown in the pandemic around 2020.
Yeah.
Around the release of the Crown Tundra DLC for Sword and Shield is when I really started kind of streaming regularly, and I've been streaming regularly ever since. That user interaction is just something that's always so important to me, and that's why I love putting up all the little art on the layout and everything, because it makes something as monotonous as Shiny Onion can be so much fun seeing the creativity of all the people around there.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Well, that's a little smorgasbord of some bests and favourites from you, Matt. Sort of your greatest hits in a way. And thank you so much for asking those really interesting questions there. And if you'd like to submit a question for a future episode of Chazingdra Chats, then you can keep an eye on specifically my X account at Chazingdra, and also the podcast dedicated account at Chazingdra Chats. That's where I post out asking for these questions. And I'd love to hear what you'd love to hear. All right then, Matt. So we've heard a lot about your story up to now, but what's next for you?
That's a good question. I've got plenty more things in the works right now. Going back to that Emerald Professor Oak challenge, I've been working on one in Silver for almost a year exactly. And I plan on doing the final battle versus Red at NAIC this weekend, my first ever in-person Pokemon event in New Orleans. So that's going to be an exciting conclusion to that. So I'm excited to share that story. I recently did another whole Wonder Trade Gauntlet talking about that earlier in Ultra Sun before the 3DS Online recently shut down. And that's been another video project I've been working on. So I'm always keeping busy with all these different projects out there. I'm not exactly sure where life's going to take me next with career or anything like that, but there are always going to be more Pokemon to train and more shinies out there to hunt, especially with Safari Week happening. I'm going to be in the zone, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so cool that you're able to save up the conclusion of your Silver Professor Oak Challenge for the North American International Championships this weekend, but at the time of that you will hear this, that will have been a few weeks ago. And that's something we didn't talk about so much, the fact that this coming weekend will be your first in-person Pokemon tournament. I mean, I realize you're not competing there, but you're certainly going as a spectator, taking part in some of the side quests. I dare say there might be a visit to the Pokemon Center on the cards as well. And taking part in the Shiny Hunting Challenge that Kyle Quick Panic is organizing there, trying to get... well, is it 8,001? Talk to us about what exactly Kyle is aiming for there.
He's trying to get it so collectively all the people there who bring their games get to 8,192 encounters in an hour. So it greatly depends on how many people show up, how many consoles people bring, but it's definitely possible if we get enough people together for it. And chances are we might even see a shiny along the way there. So it'll be really fun to see exactly how all it pans out.
Yeah.
Something where everything's definitely left up to luck.
Absolutely. If I could be there, then I would. I'd be there shiny hunting with you all because it sounds like such a cool thing to organise. But yeah, I think it's sort of by chance quite a significant moment to be recording this episode with you just before you attend your first in-person event. And as I said to you beforehand, I have no doubt, as someone who has been to quite a few live competitive Pokemon events at this point, I have no doubt that you'll come away with an ever-expanded sort of contact book of people in this community who just want to get involved with you. Because whether you're there competing or spectating, we're all united by love of this game. So I'm excited to hear how that goes for you. And so finally, looking back from now, as someone who sort of had accidental success with their YouTube channel and is a very well-beloved streamer and content creator, looking all the way back to you being introduced to the Pokemon anime and randomly finding a shiny Butterfree in the bug catching contest in Pokemon Gold, what advice would you give to that young you?
Honestly, I just try and give myself confidence that this isn't something that I'll just grow out of, because that was one of my biggest fears all the time. I was like, what if I grow up and like years from now I'm just not interested in Pokemon at all? And that felt like a scary reality to me, and over time I realized that that's just not happening, and I need to just keep embracing it and doing what I was set out to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the kind of thing that, you know, if you make that decision that you're going to be committed to playing the games, then you won't let it happen. And it's wonderful to see that you are thriving with that. And fantastic advice as well. So the chat doesn't end there. If you want to hear Matt's Rapidash round, that's going to be 15 minutes or so of bonus questions that Matt hasn't prepared for. Questions like, taking a couple of things here, we're going to talk a little bit about Calzone and where that comes from. This is one of your characters, although no one's ever seen you in the same room together, so who knows what's going on with that lore there. The shiny that Matt is proudest of and things like that. Then you can hop on over to my Patreon and subscribe there if you'd like to see it. I really appreciate the fact that you've watched the episode, whether you're subscribing on Patreon or not. So thank you so much. And obviously, only if you're in a position to be able to do that. In the Rapidash round, we tend to discover that we've actually barely scratched the surface in the main episode. So we'd love to see you there if you can make it. But that aside, Matt, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. As I said to you before, the amount of thought that you've put into your answers and the way you've threaded them in with your life stories have been really inspiring to listen to. And I really hope that you all have enjoyed listening to this as much as I've enjoyed talking to Matt about everything. So thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure. It's been so much fun.
I'm really pleased.
Appreciate that.
I'm really pleased to hear it. Where can people find you online if they want to keep up with everything you're doing?
So on YouTube, it's AbsolBlogsPokemon. On Twitch, it's Absoltastic. And on X, Twitter, it's at the Absol.
That's right. Make sure you go and check out everything that Matt is up to, because as you've got a slight appreciation of already, there are so many irons in the fire that Matt has, really showcasing just how much there is to enjoy in these games. So make sure you go and have a follow, have a watch. And if you've enjoyed the show, then of course, would love it if you could subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. There will be new episodes every week of the podcast, Chazingdra Chats, but also as a content creator, I vlog some of the events that I'm there commentating, and I have far more ideas besides. I'm really just getting going as a content creator, so it's really interesting for me to talk to Matt about all of this. Do drop a like and a comment. As Matt can attest to, all of these things really do go a long way. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, one of the other audio apps, do leave a rating and a review, because those are really helpful too. Also, I'd love to know what you think about what Matt shared with us, giving us a lot of food for thought, and what your own Dream Team Pokemon would be. Would be fascinated to hear that. Were any of Matt's picks your favorites as well? All of this, would love to hear. Feel free to spread the word, because again, this show is all about everything that Pokemon has to offer, and hopefully there's something for anyone who has an interest in Pokemon. You can use hashtag Chazingdra Chats and hashtag 6Pokemon, One Life Story to get involved in the conversation. And of course, sometimes it's competitive guests, sometimes it's more casual players, sometimes it's shiny hunters like Matt here, and just anyone who has a connection to the community. And any guest suggestions, you can email me on chazingdra@gmail.com or find me on the socials I've mentioned. The sky's the limit in terms of the guests that we have on. So do feel free to suggest whoever you'd like to hear or see on the podcast. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok at Chazingdra, and the podcast Chazingdra Chats as well. And you can join my Discord community too. It would be a pleasure to welcome you there. Everything's going to be linked down below. So that's all the small print there. Make sure you're tuning in next week, because my guest will be the fantastic, good friend of mine, Ben Kiriakou, a fellow Pokemon video game commentator and someone who has a real pedigree and history with playing the games. Going to be fascinating to talk to Ben there, so make sure you are there for that. All right then, Matt, it's time for your Rapidash round. So if you're not joining us over on Patreon for that, then it's goodbye from Matt. Vigorous waving there if you're someone who is listening on the audio apps.
Oh, my bad.
No worries. And it's goodbye from me. Can't wait to see you next time for more Chazingdra Chats, where there'll be another 6 Pokemon, One Life Story. All right, Matt, how are you feeling about these questions?
I'm ready. Hit me.
Ready. Okay. Born ready. Let's go. Let's start.